Hello. I was thinking about a quote recently. It goes, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." And I know this quote, I have it in my head, and I wasn't quite sure where it came from, or if that was all of it. So I set out to discover the answer to that question. Apparently, this is from a speech by Franklin D. Roosevelt, his first inaugural address. I'm not going to read the whole address here because it's really only this one bit that I want to think about today. The entire line is, "So, first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance." Which is the entire line. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Fear that is nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. Okay, so there are several interesting ideas here. It's a fear, yes, but specifically what we have to fear is a certain type of fear. One that is nameless, right? That feeling of dread one can have of a monster in the closet, or of stage fright, or of driving a car for your first time, or of saying hello to a pretty girl or a handsome boy, or of losing a precious pet, right? These are fears that we can describe, we can think about, but to name them makes them real. To name death makes it real. To name how injured we could be if we extend ourselves, extend our hand, open up our hearts, and then receive nothing or receive an attack in return, is to paralyze ourselves. It is unreasoning, unjustified terror. Take umbrage with the second letter there. It is unreasoning, yes, I would say, in the sense that we do not attempt to understand it, we do not attempt to deal with it. If I have an unnamed fear, something that I do not feel capable of confronting directly, a fear I must dance around, I fear I must mention by proxy of other fears, a fear I must hide in a list, for example, then it may well be justified, but I may not be able to understand why it is justified, right? I may overestimate or underestimate how much something will hurt. I remember playing baseball when I was a kid and being quite scared that the ball was going to hit me. As you're reaching your hand up with that mitt to grab a ball flying towards your face, or you're standing at home plate ready to swing the bat, and someone is tossing a ball as fast as they can 3 inches from your face, and you are 8 years old or 10 years old or whatever, then you feel this shock, right? This immediate, visceral, oh my God, what's happening? Or this is dangerous, or I should close my eyes. And that'll make it better, right? If I can't see it, then I can't feel it. I don't have to be aware of it. If I don't name it, if I don't think about it, then I don't have to confront it. And this is a terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. So there are times when it is appropriate to retreat. It is appropriate to stand back, to reevaluate, to look at the situation around you and decide whether you want to enter into that situation again, what you want to do. If you if you're on the street and you see two people fighting at a bus stop, which has happened to me, right? There is a certain part of you which is to, go up immediately and tear them apart. And I've done that with, fighting dogs maybe. But with fighting people, I step back, I look at the situation for a few seconds, maybe a few minutes, depending on if it's shouting or fisticuffs. And I'm going to determine, okay, do I enter in and disrupt this? Are they actually trying to hurt each other, or is this just for bravado? Is one of them obviously on drugs of some sort? Is one of them much bigger and stronger than I am? Are they angry or just disgruntled? Is there someone else who is involved in this? A third person egging them on, for example? Or is there a crowd around? Am I alone? Is it the middle of the night or the middle of the day? All these issues will be part of how I interact with the situation, which I view with fear and trepidation, right? Which I enter into with hesitation. Should I do this? How should I do this? And we will attempt to reason our way through it. We'll say, well, okay, if I do this, then that'll probably happen. If this happens, then I can do that. We end up sitting in class thinking about, what if someone busts in this door and starts throwing things at people? What am I going to do? Am I going to duck left? Am I going to duck right? When we are trying to work up the courage to talk to someone, then we may pre-game our thoughts out. Okay, they say this, I want to say this. Let me have a few phrases prepared. Let me do a bit of research about this issue or whatnot, because they seem to be interested in it, and so let me attempt to gain a little bit of knowledge and prepare for this. Now, we attempt to apply reasoning to it, and we attempt to unstick ourselves, we attempt to unparalyze ourselves and move. And if we can do this, then the fear is interesting, because in the one sense it is less, in that it has less power over us. It has less force. It doesn't stop us as much. It may make us hesitant. It may make us stutter. It may make us silent when we need to speak. Fear still affects us. But once we begin moving, once we place ourselves in a situation where we have to act, then the fear is less of an issue. It holds us only partly back. I am a person who is filled with fear and worry all the time, and the way I figure out how to deal with it is to put myself in a situation where I have to, right? If I am scared of meeting and talking to strangers, then I move to a different city where I know not a single person, and I take a college class there, and I attempt to work on myself. It doesn't always go very well, and there's plenty of backsliding, but if I end up in a strange country, then I feel less embarrassed, less socially awkward in situations back at home, because I know in the back of my head, I've been in much worse places than this. I felt much more embarrassed than this. This isn't too bad. I've gone through that. And now that I'm in this situation, I have to do something, because it is worse to be paralyzed than to make the wrong choice. Silence is worse than noise. Always. There are times when we want to wait and prepare. There are times when silence is not silence, but rather contemplation. But often I find that I, in particular, become paralyzed. And I attempt to reason through my fear, and this can take days, hours, months, years. But the only way to actually deal with a fear is to stand there and say something, to keep walking into a strange part of town. And just keep your head down, keep your eyes focused on the next step, and keep walking, keep going. Because if you can do that, then you are retreating or advancing. You are moving, you are changing. And life is like that. In that to live is to change. To exist is physically, literally, to vibrate, to travel through space, to grow, and to leave certain parts of ourselves behind. I would say that there are two major types of fear, as I attempt to reason through this. The first fear is outer fear. It's the most obvious. It is the fear of the monster in the closet. It is the fear of the baseball flying at your face. It is the fear of strange people who are going to hurt you. It is the fear of the police. It is the fear of robbers. It is, the fear of wild dogs in the middle of Taiwan who have a tendency to growl, or in the middle of Mexico who have the tendency to growl. It is the worry that as I step off a train in the middle of Eastern Europe in the middle of the night, that I am in some sort of possible danger because I don't know the area. It seems halfway deserted. I don't really know anyone around here. I don't know the language. And even if I am perfectly assured that the place is safe, even if I am quite convinced that the dog I'm walking past is not going to attack me or harm me, even if I am convinced that a person screaming at me is not going to go farther than screaming, then I may have reason not to fear, but I still feel the fear. And if I have reason not to fear and I still feel the fear, then I can move past that. If I can tell myself I've been hurt before, physically, I've got cuts and bruises. I've had to run. I've had to have surgery. I've had to deal with a headache. I've gone half blind because of this. I almost died because of that. And so on and so on. Then then I find that we can deal with that. Outer fears, once you recognize what they are not as strong. And there are still times where, I might be crossing a broken bridge and my limbs start shaking. But I know at the same time that if I keep my feet moving, if I make sure that I take the time to place my hands in the correct position before I take another step, if I have my 3 connections before I break the fourth one and move somewhere, and then I have 3 connections and I move another limb, and then 3 connections and I move another limb, right? Even if I'm shaking and I'm nervous because I'm 40 feet above a ravine and could conceivably fall, even if I'm rappelling down a cliff, then overcoming one physical fear is linked to overcoming other physical fears I feel. If you've gotten into a few fights and been punched a few times, then the next fight, for all its worry, is not as terrible. And, once you've been hurt a little bit, then you can tell yourself, oh, it's only a broken bone that I could get from this. It's only a bruise that I'm likely to receive. It's only a cut. And there are times when the danger becomes more than you are expected, or you were expecting, and you have to sit back and stand in shock. You realize that the person you're about to fight is actually 100 pounds heavier than you. or has actually pulled a knife, and you step back for a second in your head going, I'm not necessarily afraid of the situation, but I am now reevaluating what is going on because it has gone past what I expect to be the case. It has gone past the world in which I live. And yet we are not necessarily frozen with fear in that moment because it is something we can reason through, something we can understand. Yes, I think that would be the feeling, right? An outer fear is something we can understand. It is pain, it is loss, it is bruises and blood and breaking things and losing things sometimes. Being robbed, for example, or being punched in the middle by someone walking down the street who you've never seen before in your entire life. And then you come to the same street the next day and you're sort of hesitant to walk on the sidewalk again because in your head you've got, okay, that's a dangerous sidewalk because something happened to me once. Or it may be that per people you see, you conceive of as dangerous. Or situations you conceive of as dangerous, not necessarily because you understand what's going on, but possibly because you do not understand what is going on, right? If I'm interacting with a new culture in a new country for the first time, then I'm not sure fear is the right word so much as wariness is, right? And we don't have to fear wariness. We don't have to fear being careful. We don't have to fear that stepping back for a second. I think what Roosevelt is pointing out here is that there's a healthy fear and there's unhealthy fear. An unhealthy outside fear would be something like a phobia of spiders or a fear of heights, right? It is useful, it is valid, but it is also overblown, right? It is not just a fear or a worry about a situation. It is a phobia which overthrows your sense of reason. It is something in your brain which is so sensitive to an outside situation that it is more powerful and influence upon you than your own mind. And that is a dangerous spot to be in. When the outside influences you over much. Yes. Okay. But there are also interior fears. And these, I imagine to be the worst ones. This is something like the fear of embarrassing yourself, the fear of injuring your heart, the fear of failure, the fear of trying and attempting to do something but receiving nothing in return. The fear of putting yourself out there and being proud and courageous but becoming laughed at. The fear that there is something not quite right with the way we think or feel or wish to be existent in the world. These can be social fears, for example. I find it, like for me, I find it easier to go to a strange country and walk around in a strange street than to talk to strange people in my own country. Because these interior worries are more powerful. These interior worries are more likely and have a tendency to paralyze because they are a sort of reasoning, right? Outside fears, physical fears, can be reasoned with, but you can understand them in almost their entirety. Whereas an interior fear, even if you understand what is happening, you may not be able to name the fear. You may not be able to confront the fear or face the fear or move the fear around. it can, I can certify this, right? For a young man, it can be much harder to say no than yes sometimes. It can be much harder to stand up for yourself and proclaim to the world or to society or to a specific person or to a teacher, to a parent, or to a friend that this is where I stand and I will go no further. I will not back away. I will not agree with you on this place. I will not do what you want me to do. It is always easier to go with the flow, to allow someone else to tell you what to do and who to be and how to exist. And to go against all that, to certify your individuality, often means jumping into the unknown, because what we want to do when we face any sort of fear is understand what is happening, okay? And an outside fear can generally be understood in a physical manner, but an interior fear is greater in the sense it has to do with identity, I would say. It has to do with how I perceive myself and how I believe I should act, in this moral sense. Because I know I can do terrible things, but that does not mean that I should do terrible things. I limit myself in my actions. I limit myself in my feelings, I would say. Right? When most commonly, we limit ourselves in our actions and our speech. We hold back because we think people will not like what we have to say. We hold back because we feel that we ourselves have not completed the thought. We ourselves have not evolved to a level where we are competent to deal with the structures of whatever the issue might be, whether it be societal, whether it be emotional, mental, whether it have to do with some sort of religion or anti-religion, whether it has to do with a critique of an economic system or a critique of a political system, right? I'm always going, I don't know enough. And someone else knows more than me. Someone else has a better opinion than me. Let me go read a book. Let me go find out. Let me go Google this. Let me go watch 3 or 4 YouTube videos about this situation. And every time I do that, I will learn more and more and more. But when you do that for too long, when you tend to intake information without putting information out there, then your own views and beliefs become somewhat frail because they are not tested. They are not strengthened by adversity. And I know this. I have opinions and ideas and beliefs and feelings which I keep to myself, and I keep to myself to such a degree that they have failed to find a place to fit. We can find positions for our feelings and beliefs and ideas and experiences by learning about definitions, right? If you are attracted to people in a certain way, then learning about a definition of a type of attraction, allosexual or pan-romantic or whatever the case may be. I should probably know more of these off the top of my head, right? Then you name yourself and thereby find that you link the outside issues with the inside issues. Okay? If you find out that you are gay, for example, why is that such an issue for people? I would see it has to do with I would presume it is an issue for people because it has to do with the way they perceive themselves and the way they believe the outside world will deal with them, right? So it's an interior fear and an exterior fear. But as well, it has to do with how they open up to other people. It is I would say something like a base fear, right? A fear in the heart or of the soul. Not just of the mind or the social position, but of who you are and what can happen to you, right? Like if I realize that I like girls one day as a teenager or as someone who's 32, then that means that there is an avenue in the world now through which I can be affected, right? There's a space that is opened up which is more emotionally colored. It's like if you grew up and you had never seen green, and then one day you saw green, and you realize that green was there, all that green, that color, that idea of Ireland and the Irish dance, and of plants and leaves and curry, all had something in common. And what you thought was disparate and different is now together, and you're like, oh, that's not varieties of gray, right? Like everything else, that is green, that is something I can understand as special and unique, and now I see it, and the world itself has changed. And I mean that quite literally, right? The world as I perceive it has changed. And in that change of perception, my own perception of myself has changed. So if I knew who I was before, now I'm asking myself, do I know who I am after this change has happened to me? And I have to go figure that out. And it's like beginning first grade again. You enter into the classroom of your society or your planet or your friends, and you might know them, but you're not sure they know you. In fact, you're not even sure that you know you at that point. And if that is the case, then what we would tend to do is fall back on previous actions, right? The way I acted before. But you may also search for new ways of acting, right? I know this can happen to people, for example, who transition between sexes, is that they leave all their old friends behind, right? They want to enter into a new life in a new way, and they don't want this memory of who they used to be to infect who they are today. I mean, to me, of course, this seems very sad. To me, who is a person mired in the past, a person who builds up ideas and structures through a long period of time and goes back years, decades sometimes, for examples in order to understand situations today, right? If I'm reading about politics today, I'm thinking in the back of my head about the Roman Empire. I'm thinking about the Gracchi brothers. I'm thinking about Caesar crossing the Rubicon, and Mark Antony and Cleopatra and Crassus buying votes and stuff like this. I'm thinking back to communist revolutions. I'm thinking back to issues between the Scots and the English, or the Irish and the English, or the Welsh and the English, or the English and the English, or the French and the English, or the Americans and the English. England England can be very useful as a pivot point for understanding situations. India and England. For England and Germany, right? You have these are different interactions that the country will have, and I can think, okay, well, how does that relate to my country today and how it acts, or my situation I'm seeing today, or even, me as a person. Should I interfere with the continent and make my voice heard and land troops and go around the world grabbing colonies? Or should I sit safe behind the channel and make sure I have a strong fleet? I don't need a ground force. I just need to be myself and unify my own disparate identities, disparate country pieces, and then move on from there, right? Do I unify and then move, or do I move in order to unify? For example, they can think of these. But when we come to interior fears, how do we get past becoming paralyzed, right? Because I think we all deal with this in some way when we're sitting in bed unable to go to sleep, when we are walking around and pacing, when we are talking to a camera unable to say exactly what we mean, or mention in a notebook exactly what the problem is, right? We dance around an issue because it seems dangerous to enter into a conversation with either the world or with ourselves, right? We are not prepared for the earthquakes, and we know we are not prepared, and we only have one wing, not 1,000 to float on. And then the ship at sea is all that we're using to cross the ocean is always bobbing and weaving in the waves, right? There's no stability. Even when we have stability and we stand upon a rock, all of a sudden we know that there may be an earthquake. We know that thunder can strike us from the sky. We know that someone we love could die. We know that we could be hit by a car. We know that we could lose our job. We know that our country could go to war, right? The world itself is not stable. But what we try to do, especially when you have an interior fear, I think, is seek a stable place in the outside, right? We have our friends, or we sit in our room because it does not change very easily and we can control what goes on here. We quiet ourselves and silence ourselves. In the ideas we have in our head, we try to test them and strengthen them until we feel they are worthy and capable of going outside, becoming known, becoming talked about. But as I mentioned, I tend to find this rather difficult to do from the start. What I have found works, the reason I'm where I am today and incapable even of, and am capable of speaking and communicating with people, is because I place myself in a situation where I say, I have to do this. And there is no retreat. This nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. So to convert retreat into advance is to take our hesitancy and use it as a springboard, use it as a solar slingshot for the spaceship to make it go faster and farther than it could by its own power. A gravity assist is what I tend to seek out. Even as I know this, I'm not a mathematical person. I am not sure of the correct path to take. But at this same time, also, I'm not a spaceship, in that I have more like I'm a spaceship with a solar sail. I do not simply rely upon my engine. I can catch rays from the sun. I can catch powers and particles and use that to power my own movement when I am running low on energy or force. I can grab the outside and use it to push myself forward. So getting over fear or dealing with fear in this sense, I would say, may have something to do with the transition of energies between outside and inside. With how you can convert your will or your hope or your frustration into action, and how you can take an action or an event and have that affect how you believe or think or feel. You know, how much energy do you have? Because we often, I think, feel that we have no energy. That it's difficult to move, to change, to do anything. It's so many steps just to get out the door, just to leave our room. But then we receive a call, we receive an invitation to a play, and it's easier that way. We are told we have to take grandma to church in her wheelchair, and all of a sudden, oh, someone else outside needs me, so I can do something now. You know, we do artwork, and then somebody randomly sees a post of ours and says, I like your artwork. Now I can take that energy and convert it into my own beliefs. You know, okay, maybe my artwork is good. Maybe it is worth something, you know. And as regards what I tend to do, or as regards what I intend to do next, it is to place myself in a position where I can grab energy in this way, where I have my internal frustrations and I am able to expend them and expel them into a medium of the world and wait for a return, wait for an echo. Right? This requires me to be awkward and strange. This requires me to be wrong. This requires me to say and do things I would much rather not say or do, but holding them within requires energy as well. You know, if you are falling apart, if you are bursting apart in your brain or your soul or your social identity, then what is happening is there is an energy inside you, or there is a gateway to an energy, which you are finding it difficult to contain within your present self, within your present situation, right? You have something is going on and you need to do something with that, because if you don't, then the energy quiets, the energy becomes nothing, and we ourselves become less because we have expended our own energy holding ourselves back. So to fear, right? To be afraid of fear is to suffer the slings and arrows of your own imagination, which I believe is possibly a quote from Hamlet, which maybe I am just understanding right now. Yeah, that's always interesting when you pull an old quote out of nowhere, when you pull an old piece of the world, and it comes from you have imbibed at some point in your life, and it comes forth from your own lips in a new sense, and it's not quite, you know, holding up a skull of, I want to say Rosencrantz, and repeating a soliloquy from a book, but it's one sentence out of the millions of sentences we've heard in our lives, which now has new meaning to us. It's a new poem. It's a new situation. It's a new look, or for me at least, it's a new possibility. It's recognizing that there are paths in the world which I've heard about but did not understand for the longest time. And how do I reach those areas? How do I leave the house? How do I exit the gate? How do I wander through the forest and the jungle and find out this light which I see glimmering? Right? And there's no direction I can go, right? I can chase after the sunlight, but if I'm doing that, I'm not getting anywhere, then I have to just keep going, right? If I stop, if I stay still, then I have to put down roots. I have to think, okay, is there water here? Is there soil? Is there air? Can I live in this moment, in this time? And if I can't, if I'm looking around and it is a dry and blasted desert, if I'm looking around and the leaves are plucked of fruit, if I'm looking around and there is some poisonous fog or poisonous mold slowly growing all around me, then I have to move or die. I have to move or cover my eyes and my ears and my mouth and live without the recognition of evil or good. I have to give up being human and become something like a rock, become something that survives but doesn't thrive. And that is a dangerous place to be in, because it is giving in to what fear represents. Paralyzation, unmovement, unchangingness. Not even going backwards, because going backwards can, on occasion, be the correct choice. To step away from yourself or to repeat what you did before in order to gain strength through tradition or through repetition or through a ceremony of some sort, right? By recognizing that the past is in you and exists in you, but also the future does as well, and melding those two in the present is a way of stepping past the desert, is a way of finding that oasis in the midst of troubles. An oasis where you do not live, but only rest for a while, only prepare for the next step in the journey. And you may not know where that journey is, but if you never try, right? If you never make mistakes, if you never stand there and allow fear or that which you are afraid of to strike you, if you are never willing to get in that fight and suffer those bruises of the limbs or the spirit, then I think we fail in some way at becoming what we could be. I have known too many people who stay the same for 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years, or who become worse, become more angry, become more frustrated, become more tight-lipped. They limit themselves and what they can do and who they are, how they enjoy the world, what they can learn, and I have to ask myself, do I want to become that sort of person? Do I want to face the world or accept the world? Do I want to fight myself or give up before my own fears? Do I want to name my fears and give them form and shape and so see demons arise before my eyes, hear the closet door open and sense a claw reaching over the bed ready to crush the life out of me? It goes back to just that childhood fear of sitting in your room, in your bed, with a blanket over your head, and knowing that there are terrible, terrible things and events and possibilities outside, but feeling the urge to go to the bathroom, right? Feeling the need that something in you is going to explode. Being hungry, feeling the need that something in you is empty. Being angry at an event that happened earlier in the day and ranting to yourself. Making plans about what you would do and how you can live. Preparing to do something tomorrow. And by preparing to do something tomorrow, we strengthen ourselves today. We strengthen how we survive. We make ourselves tougher, but not more alive. In order to be alive, in order to face the monsters, you have to take the blanket off your head and stare into the dark, scream into the void. Light a flashlight, step out onto the cold floor. Grip a stick in your hand and wave it back and forth, just in case something is there. When you find nothing, get up and do something anyway, right? Get up and leave the room. Get up and turn on the light. And what can often happen, I think, is we get up and we think, okay, I can go and turn on the light, or I can walk through the dark. And there are moments when it is correct to turn on the light. I think there are a great many times when it is correct to go and seek out wisdom and knowledge, to cry out for help, to interact with the world and draw power out of it. But if we always need that light, if we are unable to move without that light, then when the electricity fails one day, or when our parents are asleep, we will be stuck in bed. At some point, we need to either go out in the dark, or at least be capable of going out in the dark, of knowing that we can say and do what we are afraid to say and do for whatever reason, whether it is a physical fear, a social fear, a spiritual fear, a fear of being wrong, a fear of being laughed at, a fear of being hated. But if all we have to fear is fear itself, the fear that is nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed effort to convert retreat into advance. If we can believe that statement for a bit, then we can understand our own fear. But understanding is not enough. We need to take action.